Hello, Empire Builders. Welcome to English Story School. Part 1. The question, what if the quietest person you knew was secretly building something that would change everything? What if the kid sitting in the back of the classroom, ignored by most, mocked by some, was quietly laying the bricks of an empire every single night? You'd probably laugh, right? Because silence doesn't look powerful until it is. Quiet isn't empty. Quiet is building. Part 2. The Invisible Boy. He wasn't the loud one in class. He wasn't the captain of the team or the kid teachers bragged about. He wasn't the kind whose name echoed in assemblies or whose story spread through hallways. He was invisible. Invisible at lunch, invisible during group projects, invisible in the playground chaos. To most, he was just there, like the old clock on the classroom wall, always present but rarely noticed. At lunch, while others traded jokes, swapped food, or argued about weekend plans, he sat alone. His tray untouched, his back slightly hunched, his pen moving across a notebook that no one ever cared to look at. But he wasn't doodling cartoon characters like some kids did. He wasn't scribbling random nonsense. He was sketching ideas, raw, unpolished blueprints of a future no one else could see. Numbers, arrows, boxes, notes about markets he barely understood yet. Drafts of designs, quotes he'd overheard, written down as reminders. It didn't look like much, but inside that notebook was a seed of something extraordinary. Here's the truth. Invisibility doesn't mean weakness. It means preparation. The world has a dangerous habit of underestimating the unseen. People confuse silence with emptiness, but silence often hides storms. They confuse being unnoticed with being unimportant, but invisibility often conceals the greatest preparation. He knew this. He embraced this. Never underestimate the one who eats alone. They're feeding more than their stomach. They're feeding their vision. Still, it wasn't easy. Every day, the sting of being overlooked dug into him. Teachers rarely called his name because they assumed he had nothing to add. Classmates didn't invite him into conversations because they assumed he had nothing to say. Even when he scored well on assignments, it wasn't celebrated. It was dismissed as luck or ignored altogether. Loneliness can crush some people. It can hollow them out. But for him, loneliness became a forge. Instead of begging for attention, he sharpened his focus. Instead of chasing validation, he learned patience. And instead of seeking belonging in shallow friendships, he found companionship in his vision. Solitude isn't punishment. It's practice for leadership. Invisibility has its own kind of freedom. He could move without pressure. He could fail without an audience. While others bragged about shallow victories, he was stacking quiet skills. While they chased claps, he chased competence. While they built reputations, he built foundations. He wasn't loud because he didn't need to be. His vision was loud enough inside his head, echoing every time he flipped another page in his notebook. The world thought he was just surviving, but he was rehearsing. One afternoon, a kid leaned over his shoulder in the cafeteria, trying to peek into his notebook. "What is that?" "Math homework," he laughed. The silent boy didn't answer. He closed the cover gently, not out of fear, but out of confidence. The ideas inside weren't meant for ridicule. They weren't meant for cafeteria chatter. They were meant for the future. Guard your vision until it's strong enough to stand on its own. And so, he carried on, invisible by day, alive by night. At school, he let their laughter roll over him like water over stone. At home, once the door closed, he returned to his world. The lamp switched on. The cracked laptop hummed. His notebook opened again. The invisibility wasn't a curse anymore. It was camouflage, because the truth is, people can't destroy what they can't see. He knew he wasn't ready yet. He knew his empire was still fragile, just sketches on paper, half-baked prototypes on a screen. He knew that if he shouted about it too early, their ridicule could crush it before it was ready. So he waited. He worked. He stayed invisible, not because he was weak, but because he was patient. The seed doesn't fight for attention in the soil. It grows quietly until one day it breaks through concrete, and deep down, he relished the invisibility. While they mocked his silence, he studied their noise. He learned which distractions ruined focus. He watched how arrogance blinded people to opportunities. He noticed how the loudest voices often achieve the least. Silence was teaching him. Invisibility was protecting him. Loneliness was shaping him. This wasn't weakness. This was war preparation. One teacher, frustrated with his silence, once asked, "Do you ever speak, or do you just plan to sit quietly your whole life?" He didn't answer out loud, but in his heart he whispered, "I'll speak when the empire is ready," because he understood something the world didn't. Noise creates moments. Silence creates legacies. And though the cafeteria remained empty around him, though the classroom continued to overlook him, though the world ignored him, he was building. Invisible, patient, unshakable. The invisible boy wasn't lost. He was loading, and when the time came, the world would learn the truth. Silence wasn't weakness. It was power in disguise. Part 3. The fire no one saw. By day, he endured the whispers, the mocking tones, the sarcastic smirks. Weird kid, loser, dreamer. The labels stuck to him like shadows he couldn't shake off. Each one landed like a punch to the gut. But what they didn't realize was this. Every insult was fuel. Every laugh was oxygen. Every whisper was thrown onto a fire they couldn't see. Because while the daylight made him look small, the night told a different story. His room transformed after sunset. The moment the door closed and the rest of the house fell silent, his sanctuary came alive. The cracked laptop hummed like an old engine. The weak desk lamp threw a pale circle of light over his desk, but to him it felt like a spotlight on a battlefield. Notebooks stacked in uneven towers, coffee-stained papers, sticky notes littered with arrows, goals, fragments of ideas. His phone timer set to intervals. 45 minutes of work, 5 minutes of stretching, repeat until sunrise. To others, it would look like chaos. To him, it was war. While others waste their nights escaping life, I spend mine creating it. This was a fire no one saw. While his classmates lost themselves in video games, binged shows, or scrolled endlessly through feeds, he was learning, grinding, sharpening. He devoured online courses, free PDFs, blogs written by entrepreneurs. He watched tutorials until his eyes burned. Coding, designing, writing, marketing, communication. He was building a skill set brick by brick, failure by failure, late night after late night. The laptop froze often. Files got corrupted. Internet crashed at the worst times. But none of it mattered, because while the world outside his window slept, He was becoming something they could never imagine. Sometimes exhaustion clawed at him. His body begged for sleep, his head heavy, his eyes stinging. But then he'd remember the way the bullies' voices sounded in the hallway, the way the teachers overlooked him, the way his name never came up in praise, but always in ridicule. And he'd mutter under his breath, "Not tonight. Not until I win." That whisper lit the fire again. His hands moved across the keyboard. His pen scratched across the paper. His silence wasn't surrender. It was sharpening. Legends are built when no one is watching. He was obsessed, yes, but obsession is just passion weaponized. He wanted to know how businesses worked, so he started reading case studies at 2 a.m. He wanted to understand human psychology, so he read books on persuasion while his classmates dreamed. He wanted to create value, so he experimented with tiny projects, failing, fixing, trying again. The nights weren't glamorous. They were lonely, heavy, brutal. His back ached, his stomach growled, his vision blurred. But every struggle was another rep in the gym of destiny. Every mistake was another step in the staircase of mastery. Suffering in silence today builds a roar the world can't ignore tomorrow. There were nights when he doubted himself, nights when he wondered if all this grinding was pointless. What if they were right? What if he was just a dreamer, a loser, a fool burning out in the dark? But then he'd glance at the notebook filled with ideas. He'd see the tiny progress, a website half finished, a design slightly better than yesterday, a line of code that finally worked. And in that moment, the fire surged again. Progress was oxygen. Even the smallest step forward was proof he wasn't stuck, proof he was moving. And movement was all he needed. The house was quiet at 3 a.m., but his mind was alive with thunder. A problem he couldn't solve haunted him until he cracked it. A line of text he wrote at 4 a.m. became a slogan he'd later never forget. A failed design he trashed today sparked an even better version tomorrow. This was the rhythm of his nights: struggle, failure, breakthrough, repeat. And nobody knew. When the alarm rang for school, his body was heavy, but his soul was lit. He walked through the halls tired, but unbroken. They looked at him and saw weakness, but they didn't know he had already fought wars before sunrise. They mocked his quiet walk. They joked about his messy hair. They pointed at the bags under his eyes. But he smiled, because those bags weren't from wasting time. They were from investing it. The grind leaves scars, but they are scars of birth, not death. His teachers thought he was distracted. His classmates thought he was weird. Nobody realized he was in training. He wasn't preparing for the next test. He was preparing for life. And the fire? It grew bigger with every whisper, every insult, every dismissal. By day, he looked invisible. By night, he was becoming unstoppable. The fire no one saw was his greatest weapon, because when the day came for him to reveal what he had built, the world would be blindsided. They would ask, "When did this happen? How did we miss this?" And the answer would be simple. They missed it because they weren't watching when it mattered. Greatness is never born in the spotlight. It is born in shadows, sharpened in silence, and revealed in shock. That was his truth. That was his reality. They called him a dreamer. They mocked his silence. They laughed at his late nights. But in those late nights, legends were being built. And he knew, one day, when the world finally looked his way, the fire they never saw would burn brighter than anything they had ever imagined. Part 4. The First Failure. Not everything worked. In fact, almost nothing did at first. The nights that looked so full of possibility often ended in heartbreak. His first projects collapsed before they even had a chance to stand. Ideas that felt brilliant in the light of day fell apart under the harsh glare of his desk lamp at night. What looked perfect in his notebook mocked him on the screen. Websites wouldn't load. Designs that seemed sleek in his mind broke apart like shattered glass when he tried to build them. Emails he spent hours crafting bounced back unanswered, like tennis balls slammed against a wall. And the silence after each failure, it was louder than the bullies in the hallway. One night, he launched his very first website. He had spent 2 weeks obsessing over every pixel. He imagined showing it off, maybe even making his first sale. When he finally pressed publish, his heart raced. He typed in the URL, hit enter, and watched as the page refused to load. Error. Reload. Error again. His stomach dropped. His palms went cold. He checked the code again, desperate for a mistake he could fix. But nothing worked. His grand launch was a silent disaster. The screen mocked him with its blankness. He buried his head in his hands, fighting the urge to scream. For a second, he thought of giving up. He thought of all the laughter he'd hear if anyone found out. See, we told you he was a loser. But instead of breaking, he sat back, exhaled, and whispered to himself, "Good. Now I know what not to do." Failure is not the opposite of success. It's the tuition you pay for greatness. Another time, he poured his energy into designing a product. He spent nights learning, experimenting, shaping something he thought could change everything. When he finally shared it in an online forum, expecting curiosity if not applause, the first comment he saw read, "This is garbage. Delete it." The second, "Waste of time." The third, silence. No one else bothered to even notice. He stared at the screen for a long time. Each comment was like a knife. Not because they doubted him, he was used to doubt, but because this time, for a flicker of a moment, he had believed. He closed the laptop, lay back on his bed, and stared at the ceiling. His chest ached with disappointment. But then a strange thing happened. He smiled, because deep down he knew, at least he tried. While others slept, while others wasted hours on nothing, he had created something. Maybe it wasn't good enough yet, but it was real. Better a failure born of effort than a regret born of inaction. Failure became his loudest teacher. The first time his laptop crashed, he learned to back everything up. The first time no one responded to his emails, he learned how to write better ones. The first time his design was trashed, he learned to toughen his skin. Every mistake etched a scar into his process. Every rejection hardened his resolve. Every collapse built the foundation of resilience. But here's what most people miss. Failure isn't a thief. It doesn't come to steal your dreams. Failure is an investor. It demands payment up front in the currency of frustration, tears, and sleepless nights. And in return, it leaves behind lessons more valuable than gold. He began to see it that way. When a plan failed, he didn't cry, "Why me?" anymore. He asked, "What's next?" When a design broke, he didn't call himself stupid. He asked, "What can I learn?" When he hit rock bottom, he stopped seeing it as a grave and started seeing it as solid ground. The master has failed more times than the beginner has even tried. Still, some nights cut deeper than others. There was the time he stayed up till 5 a.m. working on a pitch. He rehearsed it in front of the mirror until his voice cracked. He sent it out to 10 potential clients with trembling hands. Days passed. Weeks. Not a single reply. The silence burned like acid. He wanted to throw his laptop out the window. He wanted to scream at the universe. But instead, he went back to the notebook, opened a new page, and wrote at the top, "Lesson learned." Below it, he listed every possible reason for failure. Maybe the pitch was too long. Maybe it was too vague. Maybe he sent it to the wrong people. He didn't know, but he knew this. He would try again, and again, and again, until something cracked. He realized something powerful. Failure wasn't chasing him. He was chasing failure, because every failure meant he was in the arena. Every failure meant he had tried. Every failure meant he was closer to the one time he wouldn't fail. Fall in love with failure, and success has no choice but to show up. By now, his classmates had their own failures too: botched exams, bad sports games, teenage heartbreaks. But they wore their failures like chains, dragging them down. He wore his like armor, because he wasn't failing at the same thing. He was failing forward. Each mistake pushed him into new territory. Each crash unlocked a new layer of skill. Each rejection toughened his voice. Failure was turning him into something else. Not just a dreamer, not just a builder, but a fighter. Of course, he never showed it. In class, he was still the invisible kid, still quiet, still overlooked. No one saw the scars hidden behind his silence. No one knew how many battles he fought before sunrise. But one day they would. One day, the failures that mocked him would become the foundation others stood on. One day, the scars they couldn't see would become the story they couldn't ignore. Failure mocked him louder than the bullies did. But unlike the bullies, failure stayed long enough to teach him. Unlike the bullies, failure didn't leave when he grew stronger. Unlike the bullies, failure was honest. Brutally honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, is a gift. Because in failure's mirror, he didn't see weakness. He saw potential waiting to be forged. He smiled through the pain because he finally understood. Success isn't born in victory. Success is born in loss, in heartbreak, in the ashes of everything that collapsed. Failure is the tuition. Greatness is the degree. And he was willing to pay. Part 5. Loneliness turns to strength. It hurt, more than he ever admitted. The rejections, the silence, the being forgotten. Each day felt like a reminder that he didn't belong, that he was an outsider in a world obsessed with noise. At first, it hollowed him out. He would sit in the cafeteria, the sound of laughter echoing around him, feeling like a ghost no one cared to see. Walking home alone, every step heavy, his shadow the only companion. Nights were worse sometimes, staring at the ceiling, wondering if invisibility was his destiny. But slowly, painfully, something began to shift. Loneliness wasn't a prison anymore. It was freedom. Freedom to build without distraction. When you're surrounded by noise, everyone wants a piece of you. Their opinions, their jokes, their doubts, they crowd your vision. But loneliness gave him space. In the silence, he could hear his own thoughts clearly. He could pursue his ideas without interruption. No one was pulling him toward parties or distractions. No one was mocking him mid-creation. His solitude was a clean canvas. He started using it like oxygen. Hours alone didn't feel like punishment. They felt like opportunity. Every second he wasn't invited out was a second he invested inward. Isolation isn't the absence of life. It's the presence of focus. freedom to experiment without judgment. Failure is hardest when people are watching, when every stumble becomes entertainment, when every mistake becomes gossip. But his invisibility protected him. He could crash a project, and no one would care, because no one was looking. That was his superpower. Others wasted their energy hiding their failures. He embraced his. Alone in his room, he could break things, rebuild them, break them again, and there was no audience to laugh, no critic to tear him down. Each failure was private, each experiment his own. Loneliness turned his room into a laboratory. Every setback was data. Every night alone was an incubation period. The seed grows best underground, away from the eyes, until it's strong enough to break the soil. Freedom to become someone no one expected. The world thought they had him figured out. He's quiet. He'll always be average. He'll never surprise us. Perfect. Let them think that. Their underestimation was camouflage, a blanket of invisibility that hid his transformation. Each day, he was rewriting himself, learning new skills, stacking knowledge, sharpening his mind. While they dismissed him as irrelevant, he was becoming dangerous. While they forgot about him, he was building something unforgettable. Greatness loves the shadows. History proves it. The strongest leaders, the greatest innovators, the fiercest warriors were shaped in silence long before the world knew their names. He was learning to love that silence. The world is loud, but greatness is born in silence. There were nights when he sat by the window, watching city lights flicker in the distance. Each light represented people living their lives, laughing, arguing, celebrating. And for a second, loneliness would pinch his chest. But then he'd look back at his desk, notebooks stacked with ideas, the glow of his laptop, the half-finished project on his screen. And he would smile, because while the world lived for noise, he was living for legacy. Noise fades. Legacy lasts. The shift wasn't instant. It was slow, like the strengthening of muscles after months of unseen workouts. He stopped craving invitations that never came. He stopped aching for recognition that wasn't offered. He stopped trying to prove his worth to people who had already decided he had none. Instead, he redirected that energy inward. Instead of waiting for someone to ask about his ideas, he polished them quietly. Instead of hoping to be noticed in class, he noticed every detail around him. The way people moved, the way they spoke, the way they underestimated. Instead of needing companionship, he built resilience. Loneliness had carved him hollow at first, but now it was filling him with fire. One afternoon, as he sat in the cafeteria sketching, he overheard a group nearby mocking him. Look at him, always scribbling. Probably just drawing cartoons. Yeah, he's probably writing love notes to his computer. The words cut, but only for a moment. He didn't flinch. He didn't respond. He just turned the page and kept sketching, because inside, something clicked. Their noise was temporary. His work was permanent. Their voices would be forgotten in a week. His vision could outlive them all. Let them laugh at your silence. One day, your silence will roar louder than their noise. The loneliness became strength in another way, too. It made him immune to validation. Most people chase applause. They rise and fall with the opinions of others. But when no one is clapping for you, you learn to clap for yourself. You learn to move without permission, to create without praise, to persist without recognition. That independence is unshakable. He didn't need a crowd. He didn't need approval. He only needed the fire inside his chest, the vision in his notebook, and the nights that gave him space to build. One night, as the clock ticked past midnight, he closed his laptop and whispered to himself, "I'm not lonely. I'm free." And for the first time, he believed it. Loneliness had stopped being chains. It had become wings. Yes, it hurt to be forgotten. Yes, the silence sometimes stung. But he finally understood. Loneliness wasn't the enemy. Loneliness was the training ground. Loneliness was the sharpening stone. Loneliness was the crucible in which strength was forged. And when the world finally turned to look at him, they wouldn't see the invisible boy anymore. They would see the man forged in silence. The day you stop fearing loneliness is the day you become unstoppable. Part 6, The Secret Routine. His life had split into two versions. By day, he was the silent student. Invisible, forgettable, just another face in the crowd. Overlooked even when he raised his hand. Ignored even when he had the right answer. His classmates saw only the boy slouched at the back of the room, with tired eyes and messy hair. But by night, he was something else entirely. The clock struck 3 a.m., and the transformation began. His room lit up with a faint glow, the desk lamp flickering like a torch in a cave. The cracked laptop hummed awake. His notebooks spread out like maps of secret territories waiting to be conquered. This was his other life, the life no one knew about. The life where failure wasn't shame, but training. The life where comfort didn't matter and applause didn't exist. This was where the invisible student became the relentless builder. He didn't wait for motivation. He built systems. Every night had a ritual, a routine so strict it could break weaker men, but for him, it was fuel. He'd set his alarm for 2:55 a.m. sharp. The house was silent, everyone asleep. He'd pour a glass of cold water, splash his face, and remind himself, greatness isn't built during daylight. It's forged in the hours nobody claims. The first hour was reading, not fiction, not gossip, but knowledge. Books on business, psychology, strategy. Articles written by people who had already built empires. He underlined passages, scribbled notes in the margins. Every page turned was a weapon sharpened. The second hour was practice. If he was learning code, he'd write lines until his eyes blurred. If he was studying design, he'd copy layouts pixel by pixel. If he was studying sales, he'd draft emails he'd never send, just to master the rhythm of persuasion. The third hour was execution. His projects, his prototypes, his crazy experiments that no one else would ever see. Sometimes they crashed instantly. Sometimes they limped forward. But every attempt made him sharper. Every sunrise, he was a little more dangerous than the night before. Sleep became secondary. He learned to live on naps stolen between classes, on caffeine, on raw adrenaline. While his classmates complained about staying up late to cram for one exam, he was staying up every night to prepare for life itself. Comfort became irrelevant. His bed was cold. His chair was hard. His meals were instant noodles or stale leftovers. But he never complained. He whispered to himself, discomfort is temporary. Discipline is forever. He taped a quote above his desk. If they're not clapping for you in the light, let them watch you shine in the dark. It wasn't just a reminder. It was a declaration of war. And it worked. Not because success arrived overnight, it didn't, but because routine made failure survivable. Routine made progress inevitable. Routine made him unstoppable. Most people quit because they wait for motivation. He didn't. He built a machine out of his habits. Even on nights when his body screamed for sleep, when his mind begged for rest, his routine carried him. He didn't need permission anymore. He didn't need to feel ready. The schedule made him ready. Discipline is doing what needs to be done, even when you don't feel like doing it. It wasn't glamorous. There were nights when his hands trembled from exhaustion. Nights when his laptop overheated and shut down, erasing hours of work. Nights when he stared at his screen in frustration, tears stinging his eyes. But he didn't stop, because his secret routine wasn't about comfort. It was about preparation. It was about building silently until the noise of results drowned out the voices of doubt. One night, around 4 a.m., as he stared at his reflection in the dark window, he realized something chilling. He was no longer the same boy. His eyes had changed. They weren't soft anymore. They were sharp, alive, relentless. The reflection staring back wasn't invisible. It was inevitable. He whispered, "This is who I am now." And he was right. The double life continued. By day, the world saw a ghost. By night, the world couldn't see the storm he was becoming. His classmates laughed at his yawns. He was tired because he was fighting wars they didn't know existed. His teachers scolded him for not paying attention. They had no idea he was teaching himself lessons they'd never dare to dream of. His family worried he was isolating himself. They didn't realize isolation was the crucible of his power. He wasn't two people anymore. He was one, sharpened by the contrast of invisibility and intensity. Every sunrise, when the rest of the world woke up, he closed his laptop, hid his notebooks, and walked back into his role as the silent kid. But inside, he carried a secret only he could understand. He was building something bigger than sleep, bigger than comfort, bigger than the small judgments of those around him. Legends are made at hours the world forgets exist. And so, the secret routine continued. Day after day, night after night, the grind nobody clapped for, the discipline nobody respected, the obsession nobody noticed. But that's how legends are born. Not in the spotlight, not with applause, but in the lonely hours when no one is watching. He didn't need them to see yet. He didn't need them to believe yet. He only needed one thing, the fire to keep showing up every night. And that fire, fueled by discipline and routine, was burning brighter than ever. Part 7. The Spark of Victory. For weeks, he had been grinding in silence. Nights blurred into mornings, mornings into exhaustion, exhaustion into more nights. His body was drained, but his mind refused to quit. Yet despite all his effort, despite the discipline, there had been nothing to show. No applause, no recognition, no proof. Just the endless cycle of trying and failing. But then, one night, something changed. It was past 3 a.m. The world outside his window was asleep, streets deserted, houses dark. His room smelled of stale coffee and determination. His eyes burned as he typed the final touches on his project. A simple product, one he had been testing for weeks. He pressed publish on a small ad, heart thumping louder than the silence. He leaned back, half expecting nothing. He had failed before, so why would tonight be any different? He rubbed his eyes, sighed, and thought about shutting the laptop. Then it happened. Ping. A notification flashed on the corner of the screen. At first, he thought it was an error. But no, his breath caught. He leaned closer. His heart froze, then exploded. It was real. A payment notification. His very first sale. It wasn't a fortune, barely enough to buy lunch. But to him, it felt like a kingdom. His hands trembled as he stared at the glowing screen. For a moment, he thought it was a dream. He blinked, refreshed the page, checked again. The number was still there. Someone out there, a complete stranger, had paid for something he created. Tears stung his eyes. His lips trembled into a shaky smile. He whispered into the silence of his room, "This is just the beginning." The first spark is never about the size of the flame. It's about the proof that fire exists. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the product. It was about proof. Proof that his silence had value. Proof that his grind was real. Proof that all those nights of rejection, failure, and invisibility weren't wasted. This tiny sale was a seed. And in that moment, he realized something life-changing. You don't need the world to believe in you. You only need one piece of evidence that belief is worth it. And that night, he got it. The emotions hit him like a storm. He laughed, a wild, uncontrollable laugh that startled even him. Then, a second later, he cried. Not because of sadness, but because his body didn't know what else to do. The mix of exhaustion, joy, and relief poured out in tears that soaked his notebook pages. For the first time, he felt it, victory, not the kind that's celebrated on stages or printed in newspapers. The quiet victory only you know about. The kind that happens in the shadows but feels louder than thunder in your chest. Sometimes the smallest win is the loudest scream of destiny. He didn't sleep that night. How could he? His veins buzzed with energy. He paced the room over and over, replaying the moment in his head. He opened the notification again, just to confirm it hadn't vanished. His mind lit up with possibility. If one stranger had bought it, then another could. And another. And another. If one seed had sprouted, then the field could bloom. He scribbled in his notebook furiously. Find what worked. Scale it. Improve it. Multiply it. That night, his vision shifted. Before, he was grinding on faith. Now he was grinding on proof. Faith is powerful, but proof is unstoppable. The next day at school, he walked the halls like he always did, quiet, invisible. No one noticed the fire burning in his chest. No one saw the secret victory carved into his heart. They still saw the same silent boy. But inside, he knew the truth. He wasn't just silent anymore. He was validated. He had evidence. And evidence is louder than 1,000 opinions. He overheard whispers in the hallway again. Weird kid. Loser. He smiled, because while they mocked, someone else out there valued his work enough to pay for it. And that someone else mattered more than the entire crowd around him. You don't need everyone to clap. You just need one person to prove you're not crazy. That spark became his obsession. Every night after, he chased it again. Sometimes it didn't come. Sometimes the notification stayed silent. But he didn't care. He had seen the fire once, and that was enough to keep him going. It was like running in the dark and suddenly spotting a faint light ahead. He knew the path existed now. All he had to do was keep moving. He stopped doubting himself. He stopped asking if it was worth it. That first victory had already answered the question. But here's what most people miss. The spark of victory doesn't just light the path forward. It burns away the excuses behind you. He no longer had the option of quitting. How could he, when proof was staring at him on the screen? Failure wasn't permanent anymore. It was just a step between sparks. Every rejection, every silence, every heartbreak, it didn't matter. Because now he knew his grind worked. Even if it worked slowly, even if it worked painfully, it worked. Later that week, as he sat at his desk staring at the same cracked laptop, he taped a new quote above his lamp. The world changes not when the crowd believes, but when the first stranger says yes. Every time he felt doubt creeping back, he'd look at it and smile. Because that stranger, somewhere far away, had said yes. And that yes was worth more than 1,000 no's. The invisible boy was still invisible. The silent kid was still silent. But deep in the shadows, an empire had sparked to life. And empires don't need spotlights to grow. They just need fire. And now he had it. Part 8, the double life. Days at school, nothing looked different. He still sat alone at lunch, picking at his food while others filled the room with noise. He was still quiet during group projects, letting others take credit for answers he had already solved in his notebook. He was still the shadow at the back of the classroom, the boy people joked about because they couldn't think of anything else to call him. To them, he was nothing. But what they didn't know was that their nothing was already becoming something. He carried a secret heavier than their laughter. Every time they mocked him, he thought about the payment notification that had lit up his screen. Every insult reminded him of the late-night breakthroughs no one else had seen. Every smirk pushed him to remember. While they wasted their energy laughing, he was investing his energy building. They laughed at his silence, never realizing silence was the sound of strategy. The double life wasn't easy. It was like wearing two masks. By day, he had to look invisible, to blend in, to pretend their words didn't sting. But by night, he transformed. His silence wasn't a weakness anymore, it was armor. His solitude wasn't emptiness, it was power. He played small in public, but behind closed doors, he was building big in private. And that contrast, that sharp divide between the boy they saw and the builder he was becoming, gave him an advantage they could never understand. At school, they laughed when he stumbled. At night, he mastered balance. At school, they joked about him being broke. At night, he made sales they couldn't even dream of. At school, they said he'd never matter. At night, he wrote plans that would one day change everything. They thought they knew him, but they only knew his mask. People judge the chapter they see. They don't realize you're writing the next volume in secret. The double life made him sharper. It taught him patience, taught him how to play the long game. He learned to control his emotions, to hide his victories, to let people underestimate him. And that was the most dangerous weapon of all, because the underestimated always rise when no one expects it. There were moments, though, when it almost broke him. Carrying a secret is heavy. Watching people laugh in your face while you're holding proof that you're more than what they think, that burns. But instead of exploding, he let the fire smolder inside. He whispered to himself in the mirror, "Not yet. Don't show them yet. Build first, reveal later." And every time he said those words, he believed them a little more. The double life even bled into how he moved. In school, his steps were slow, quiet, cautious. At night, his fingers flew across the keyboard, his mind racing ahead of the screen. In daylight, his voice was soft, almost invisible. In darkness, His inner voice roared with strategy, with hunger, with certainty. He wasn't living two lives by accident. He was doing it by design, because he knew a secret most people never learn. If you reveal too early, the world will kill your dream before it's ready. So he let them believe he was nobody. He let them believe he was weak. He let them believe he was silent. Because every day they underestimated him, his empire grew in the shadows. Camouflage is the greatest weapon of the builder. The less they see, the less they can stop. One afternoon, a group of classmates cornered him in the hallway. "Hey, quiet boy, what do you even do all day? Sit at home and talk to your walls." He didn't answer. He just shrugged and kept walking. They laughed louder, proud of themselves for being clever. But inside, he was grinning, because the truth was better than any comeback. What did he do all day? He played the role of the ghost. What did he do all night? He laid bricks for an empire. And when the time came, the same kids who laughed would one day Google his name. The double life taught him something deeper too. That peace doesn't come from proving people wrong immediately. Peace comes from trusting yourself enough to wait. He wasn't trying to silence them with arguments. He was preparing to silence them with results. Every joke was a countdown. Every insult was a ticking clock. And every day they mocked him, the reveal drew closer. Don't rush to prove them wrong. Build so strong they choke on their doubt when the time comes. Still, there were lonely nights when he sat at his desk and wondered how long he could carry this secret. Could he keep living this double life forever? The world saw one version of him, while his heart belonged to another. But then, he'd look at the notes on his wall, the plans half finished on his screen, and remind himself, this is the price of greatness. Greatness doesn't announce itself early. Greatness doesn't demand attention in its infancy. Greatness grows quietly in the dark until it's strong enough to step into the light. And he was willing to wait as long as it took. By day, he still looked invisible. By night, he was undeniable. The world thought his silence meant nothing. But his silence was a storm, building power with every passing hour. The double life wasn't a burden anymore. It was a strategy. Because when the day came to merge the two lives into one, when the silent kid and the empire builder stood side by side, the world wouldn't know what hit them. Part 9. Resistance grows. With every step forward, new obstacles rose. It was almost as if the world had noticed his quiet momentum and decided to test it. The resistance didn't come in a single blow. It came in waves, each one stronger than the last. At first, it was subtle. Family pressures whispered into his ears like doubt disguised as concern. Teachers raised their eyebrows, labeling him distracted, lazy, not applying himself. Friends who once sat near him began to drift. Their laughter carried elsewhere while he remained at his lonely desk. But the more resistance he faced, the sharper his focus grew. Because now, he understood something vital. Obstacles weren't barriers anymore. They were weights. And weights aren't meant to block you. Weights are meant to be lifted. The harder the pressure, the greater the diamond. His family couldn't understand why he spent so much time awake at night. His mother would knock on his door at 2 a.m., begging him to sleep. His father shook his head at the sight of his tired eyes in the morning, telling him, "You're wasting your health. No one succeeds like this." He wanted to explain. He wanted to tell them about the fire inside him, about the spark of victory that still burned in his chest. But he couldn't. Not yet. They wouldn't believe it. To them, he was still just the silent boy, a child chasing illusions. So he nodded, swallowed his explanations, and went back to work. Because deep down, he knew they weren't the enemy. They were just too scared to dream the way he dreamed. At school, the resistance grew louder. Teachers who once ignored him now scolded him for being tired in class. One of them pulled him aside after a failed test and said, "You're intelligent, but you're throwing it all away. You need to stop whatever it is you're doing at night and focus on what matters." What matters? The words echoed like chains. To them, what mattered was grades, exams, a report card that fit neatly into a system. But to him, what mattered was the empire he was building, brick by unseen brick. He walked out of the classroom with his fists clenched, whispering to himself, "Their version of success isn't mine." And then there were the friends, or at least the ones who once called themselves friends. At first, they tolerated his silence. They laughed at his quirks. They even asked once or twice why he never joined them. But when he kept saying no, when his nights kept disappearing into projects, their patience ran out. One day at lunch, he walked toward their table, tray in hand. They looked up, then quickly filled the empty seats with their bags. No words, just a clear signal. He wasn't welcome anymore. His chest tightened, but he didn't sit anywhere else. He turned, walked to his usual corner, and opened his notebook. It hurt. God, it hurt. But the pain sharpened him. When people walk away, don't chase. Their absence is just space for your growth. The resistance wasn't just external. It was internal too. There were nights when his body rebelled. His head pounded, his vision blurred, his hands trembled from exhaustion. Sometimes he stared at his laptop screen for hours, the cursor blinking back at him like mockery. Sometimes the weight of doubt pressed so hard on his chest that he felt like breaking. But he didn't. He couldn't. Because each obstacle, each setback, each doubt was just another weight. And every time he lifted it, he grew stronger. He started treating resistance like a gym. Every insult, another rep. Every doubt, another set. Every heartbreak, another muscle fiber torn, ready to regrow tougher. The world isn't trying to break you. It's trying to build you through pressure, through weight, through fire. One night, after a brutal day of lectures, scoldings, and isolation, he sat at his desk in silence. His notebook lay open, but his pen refused to move. He felt the tears prick his eyes, a lump rising in his throat. For a moment, he thought about closing it all, giving in. Then he looked at the quote taped to his wall. "If they're not clapping for you in the light, let them watch you shine in the dark." He smiled through the tears, because he finally understood resistance wasn't his enemy. Resistance was his training partner. The world wasn't laughing to break him. The world was laughing to see if he'd laugh back with results. The more resistance he faced, the calmer he became. He stopped flinching at insults. He stopped arguing with teachers. He stopped explaining himself to his family. He let the pressure build because he knew the harder the pressure, the greater the diamond. And he wasn't just a boy anymore. He was becoming that diamond. At school, they saw a quiet ghost. At home, they saw a stubborn child. Inside, he saw a warrior sharpening himself on the grindstone of resistance. Because every obstacle, every doubt, every piece of resistance was forging him into something unshakable. He wasn't breaking. He was being built. And when the time came, the world would see not the boy they doubted, but the diamond they created. Part 10. The moment to break through. Years of invisible work finally led to one public breakthrough. It wasn't planned, at least not in the way people expected. It wasn't luck, it wasn't a miracle. It was the quiet collision of preparation meeting opportunity. A competition, a showcase of projects where students were invited to present their ideas. Most kids shrugged it off as another school event, an excuse to skip class or get a certificate for their college applications. But for him, it was different. For him, this wasn't just a competition. It was the arena he had been training for in silence. When the announcement first came, some classmates snickered. Bet the quiet kid won't even sign up. He'd probably faint on stage. He has nothing to show. But he did sign up, not with loud confidence, not with a declaration, but with the same quiet resolve he had carried every night for years. He knew he wasn't ready for perfection, but he was ready for war. You don't wait for the perfect moment. You make the moment perfect by stepping into it. The day of the competition arrived. The auditorium buzzed with chatter, filled with parents, teachers, and students. The stage lights cast nervous glows on the faces of presenters. Projects range from science experiments to flashy group presentations. Loud voices, loud applause. And then his name was called. The room stilled for a second. The silent kid? The one who never raised his hand? The one they overlooked every single day? He walked onto the stage slowly, calmly, carrying nothing but a laptop and a confidence no one had ever seen before. His heart pounded, but his face didn't show it. Years of night battles had taught him how to keep steady when the fire inside was raging. He plugged in his laptop, glanced at the crowd, and for the first time, he didn't see them as judges. He saw them as witnesses. Witnesses to the empire he had been building in silence. The bullies leaned forward, smirking, waiting for him to stumble. Teachers folded their arms, skeptical. His parents sat in the back, nervous. And then he began. The first words came out shaky, but then his routine kicked in. His voice steadied. His slides lit up the screen. And as he explained his project, the room shifted. Because it wasn't just a project. It was proof. Proof of nights spent learning what no class had taught. Proof of failures that had turned into stepping stones. Proof of the fire they had all ignored. The design wasn't just clean, it was powerful. The concept wasn't just clever, it was revolutionary. He spoke with a quiet authority that made the loudest kids in class shrink into their seats. The day you stop caring what they think is the day you become unstoppable. For a long moment, the auditorium froze. The bullies blinked, their smirks erased. The doubters went silent, their words swallowed whole. Even the teachers, who once dismissed him as distracted, stared wide-eyed. He didn't crawl. He soared. The boy they thought invisible had just become undeniable. When he finished, there was no instant applause. Not because he failed, but because they were stunned. The silence after his presentation wasn't emptiness. It was impact. The kind of silence that happens when the world realizes it miscalculated. And then, slowly, the clapping began. First from the back, then from the sides, then the whole room. The applause grew louder, spilling over into cheers. But he didn't crave it. He didn't even smile. He just nodded, closed his laptop, and walked off stage. Because he knew the applause wasn't his victory. The victory was the moment he realized he didn't need it. Later, people whispered in the hallways. How did he do that? Where was he hiding all this? I didn't know he was capable of that. That was the point. He hadn't been hiding. He had been building. They just hadn't been watching. They call it sudden success, but nothing about it was sudden. It was built in silence, brick by brick. That night, lying in bed, he replayed the moment over and over. Not the applause, not the shock, but the feeling of standing in his truth, unshaken, unashamed, undeniable. He whispered to himself, "This is who I was always meant to be." And for the first time, he believed it completely. The breakthrough wasn't about winning a competition. It wasn't about recognition. It was about arrival. The silent kid had arrived, and the world could never call him invisible again. Part 11. The Shockwave. News spread like wildfire. The silent kid, the one who sat at the back of the class, hunched over his notebook, the boy no one noticed, the one teachers dismissed, classmates mocked, and friends abandoned. That boy wasn't just good. He wasn't just talented. He was extraordinary. It started small, whispers in the hallway. Did you see him on stage? That project, it was insane. By lunch, the whispers became conversations. By the end of the day, his name was everywhere. The shockwave rippled through the school first. Kids who never remembered his name were suddenly talking about him like they'd known him forever. The bullies, the loud ones, the ones who once shoved his books to the ground, they stayed quieter now, watching him from the corner of their eyes. Teachers who barely acknowledged him began to call on him in class. Their tones softer, their smiles suddenly warmer. It was ironic. The same silence they once used as proof of weakness was now the silence they respected. Success has no volume. It speaks for itself. At home, the shockwave spread too. His parents had always worried. They had seen the late nights, the tired mornings, the grades slipping in some classes. They feared he was wasting his future, burning himself out. But after the showcase, their neighbors congratulated them. Teachers called to say how brilliant their son's project was. Suddenly, his parents looked at him differently. His mother, who once knocked on his door and begged him to sleep, now peeked in and simply said, "Don't stay up too late, but keep going. We're proud of you." His father, who had once shaken his head in disappointment, clasped his shoulder firmly and whispered, "I didn't see it before, but I see it now." The validation felt good, but it wasn't what fueled him anymore. He had already learned not to live for applause. This recognition was nice, yes, but it was decoration, not foundation. Because the truth was, he didn't need their approval anymore. The shockwave spread beyond his circle. Videos of the showcase were uploaded online by students with their phones. The comments poured in, "Who is this kid? Silent but deadly. Future CEO right here." For the first time, strangers, people who had never mocked him or doubted him, saw him for what he really was, potential in motion. And the best part? He didn't crave the noise. He didn't rush to reply. He didn't plaster it everywhere. He just kept working, because success, he now understood, was self-sustaining. It didn't need a hype man. It didn't need constant explanations. It didn't even need permission. It was already enough. The loudest roar comes not from your mouth, but from your results. Of course, the shockwave had side effects too. Some who once mocked him now tried to get close. Classmates who ignored him suddenly asked if they could work together. Teachers who doubted him claimed They always knew he had it in him. Even the bullies softened their tone, pretending their words had never cut. But he remembered. He remembered every insult, every dismissal, every empty chair at the lunch table. And while he didn't hold grudges, he also didn't forget. Forgiveness didn't mean naivety. So he smiled politely, nodded at their compliments, but kept his circle tight. Because he knew, if they couldn't see his worth in the struggle, they didn't deserve a place in his triumph. Don't let applause distract you. The same hands that clap for you today might point at you tomorrow. What mattered most wasn't the validation, but the proof. The showcase was more than a victory. It was evidence that his empire wasn't just in his head anymore. It was real, tangible, visible, and evidence is more powerful than words. Every night after the showcase, when he sat at his desk, he felt different. Not arrogant, not boastful, just stronger, calmer, more certain. His grind wasn't blind anymore. It was targeted. His silence wasn't questioned anymore. It was respected, even feared, because people finally understood silence doesn't mean emptiness. Silence means strategy. The shockwave reached him in unexpected ways. Teachers who once sighed when calling his name now held him up as an example. See, quiet students can surprise you. Students who once overlooked him now leaned in during group work, curious about what he thought. But he didn't let it change him, because he knew fame is fragile. Respect built on one showcase can vanish just as quickly. So instead of basking in it, he returned to his discipline. He went back to his secret routine, his notebooks, his 3 a.m. grind. Because this was just the beginning. Don't confuse a spark for the fire. The spark is proof. The fire is what you build after. One evening, as he walked home, he overheard a pair of classmates whispering. Crazy how he never noticed him before. Yeah, he was just there. And now, he's the guy everyone's watching. He smiled to himself. That was the beauty of it. He hadn't changed overnight. They had. Their perspective had. Their respect had. His empire wasn't built in a day, but the shockwave made it visible in a day. And once it was visible, nothing could erase it. That night, staring at his reflection in the dark window, he whispered a new truth. I don't need them to believe. I only need to keep building. Because he had learned that real success doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't scream for recognition. It simply arrives undeniable, unshakable, unstoppable. And now that it had arrived, the silent kid was no longer invisible. The world had felt the shockwave, and it was only the beginning. Part 12, Building the Empire. The shockwave didn't fade, it widened. What began as a single presentation in a noisy auditorium became a quiet revolution in his life. Doors that were once locked began to unlock, one click at a time. Inboxes that had been painfully empty now filled with subject lines that made his heart thud. Interested in your work, can we talk? Proposal? Collab idea. But he didn't rush, didn't scramble. Didn't let the noise sweep him away. He did what he always did. He organized, he studied, and he built. Late nights turned into structured businesses. The same desk lamp that had watched him fail 1,000 times now watched him map systems. He created a dashboard. Not fancy at first, just a spreadsheet with rows and columns that felt like rails for a speeding train. Leads, status, next action, deliverables, outcomes. He color-coded by urgency. He wrote standard operating procedures for himself. How to open a project, how to communicate, how to close, how to learn. He wasn't just chasing wins anymore. He was designing a machine that produced them. Small wins became massive milestones. A $27 sale became $270, then $2,700, then a retainer that made his hands tremble when he saw the zeros. The strange thing? He didn't celebrate like people expected. No wild announcements, no bragging posts. He made a note in his book what worked. Why? How do I replicate it, then improve it? His mantra was simple and lethal. Don't just hit, systematize the hit. Momentum without method burns out. Method turns momentum into legacy. Clients came first. He answered quickly, short, clear, specific. He didn't oversell. He made promises that stretched him, then delivered like his life depended on it. It kind of did. He learned to scope properly, to set boundaries without apology, to say no when a project would waste his time. No used to scare him. Now it protected him. With every boundary he respected, his confidence crystallized. Investors started poking around too, drawn by the clean results and shocking speed. He listened, asked hard questions, and walked away from deals that wanted to buy his soul. He wasn't building for a flip. He was building for forever. If a contract felt like a cage, he let it go, even if the number glittered. He wrote on a sticky note and stuck it to his screen. Own your vision or someone else will own you. Opportunities multiplied. Interviews, guest posts, panels, podcasts. He said yes when it amplified the mission and no when it fed only ego. He had learned the difference the hard way. The world loves to make noise around what's rising. His job was to keep the rise real. He didn't just build for himself. He built for others. First, he hired one person, then two, then a small team that felt like a unit. Not the loudest, not the flashiest, quiet assassins like him. He gave them clarity, not chaos. Outcomes, not confusion. He paid them before he paid himself some months, because faith without payroll is just fantasy. The first time someone messaged, "Hey boss, salary received. Thank you," he stared at the screen longer than he should have. He felt something deeper than pride, responsibility. Leadership wasn't applause, it was stewardship. A leader isn't the loudest voice in the room. A leader is the clearest mirror for the mission. He set values, short, sharp, usable. 1. We say less and deliver more. 2. We make decisions with data and courage. 3. We move fast, fix fast, forgive fast. 4. We never trade ethics for speed. 5. We leave people better than we found them. Then he built rituals that made those values real. Monday huddles, 15 minutes only, no rambling. Wednesday, fix it, sprints. Pick the one thing strangling progress and cut it at the throat. Friday, reflection. What do we learn? What will we never repeat? What must we try next? He added a why it worked doc where the team wrote down the anatomy of every win. So success wasn't magic. It was a map. He rented a tiny workspace, bare walls, cheap chairs, a shared table. It smelled like coffee and ambition. On the far wall, he drew a timeline with a marker, quarters, not weeks. Targets, not fantasies. Nobody clapped when they hit a number. They clapped when they hit a system. Numbers were the echo. Systems were the voice. Clients felt the difference. They didn't just get deliverables. They got outcomes. Measurable, undeniable, repeatable. Word spread quietly, then loudly. One introduction birthed another. One testimonial multiplied into 10. Reputation accelerated while he stayed steady. The more attention he got, the more boring his internal life became. That was the trick. Public impact with private discipline. He was building a fortress inside a storm. With scale came new dragons, scope creep, opportunists, counterfeit friends, and the siren song of shortcuts. He met them all with the same blade, clarity. Here is what we do. Here is what we don't. Here is the price. Here is the promise. He created templated proposals, frictionless onboarding, crystal deadlines. He trained his team to protect their focus like treasure. If everything is urgent, nothing is important, he would remind them. Choose the one lever, then pull with both hands. Focus isn't saying yes. Focus is saying no with a smile. He refused to hoard the climb. He grew a program for kids who looked like he used to, quiet, overlooked, brilliant under the weight of doubt. He ran Saturday sessions in that small office, showing them how to build portfolios, pitch, ship, learn. He taught them to introduce themselves with actions, not adjectives. Don't tell me you're passionate, he would say, grinning. Show me what you shipped on Tuesday. Some mornings, he'd arrive early and find a kid waiting at the door, clutching a notebook the way he used to. He would unlock the door, flick on the lights, and see himself reflected back, nervous, hungry, serious. He never forgot that feeling. He never wanted anyone else to carry it alone. He set up scholarships quietly, paid for courses and devices without his name attached. Charity wasn't content. He didn't perform kindness. He practiced it. He built internal ladders too. People who started as contractors became managers. Managers became owners of outcomes. He didn't fear his team growing strong. He wanted it. A fragile leader hoards power. A real builder hands out latitude and raises the floor for everyone. He created revenue sharing because belief tastes better when everyone eats. The empire learned to breathe. Marketing feeding sales, sales honoring delivery, delivery collecting stories that fueled marketing again. He stitched feedback loops into the bones of the company so truth didn't need permission to travel. Ugly news moved fast, so solutions moved faster. He outlawed blame. He taught diagnosis. If we stumble, we ask why, not who. The room got smarter every week. New verticals emerged. The core product spawned services. Services revealed software gaps. He resisted the temptation to chase every shiny thing. One engine at a time, he'd remind himself. Master multiply. Sequence before scale. When they did expand, it was surgical, one tested hypothesis, one measured rollout. Growth wasn't chaos. Growth was choreography. He learned to sell without selling out. Investor meetings got easier. He pitched with numbers, not narratives. With retention, not reach. When a term sheet wanted control, he slid it back across the table and stood. If your money needs my spine, you can keep it, he said once with a calm smile. That line circulated in his circle for months. Capital is a tool, not a parent. Take the hammer, keep the blueprint. He established a cadence he could live with. No heroics at the expense of health. He slept more, not less, because leaders who don't rest, wreck. He worked out to empty the static from his head. He took Sundays offline and told the team to do the same. If the empire needed exhaustion to stand, it was a sandcastle. He was building bedrock. His family watched the expansion with quiet awe. The father who once questioned the long nights now carried lunch to the office sometimes, laughing at how cramped the place was. His mother sat in the corner during workshops, pretending to read while blinking away tears when she heard a teenager say, "No one ever told me I could." He hugged them often, not to prove a point, but to honor the ground he sprang from. The old school invited him back. He walked through the hallway that once swallowed him, now lined with posters celebrating alumni achievements. He didn't strut. He didn't gloat. He walked into a classroom full of whispers and raised his hands once, not to silence them, but to welcome them. "Ask anything," he said. The loud kids asked loaded questions. The quiet ones asked the real ones. He lingered for them afterward, exchanging emails and sending links to resources. He was living proof that invisible doesn't mean incapable. He wanted that proof to spread. He installed mission over vanity. The mission was simple: help quiet builders become undeniable. Every product, every hire, every partnership had to answer that sentence. If it didn't, it was noise. He stopped letting random opportunities hijack the calendar. He made a list called "Things We Do Not Do for Any Price." He printed it, framed it, and hung it by the door. If your yes has no spine, your no has no teeth. He kept learning. Always. He'd wake before dawn and study operators better than him. How they structured teams, how they handled cash, how they exited without leaving rubble. He refused to become a cautionary tale. Pride makes founders sloppy. He chose precision over pride, humility over hype. When he made mistakes, and he did, he owned them in front of the team, named the lesson, then implemented the fix. Confidence didn't mean pretending to be flawless. It meant being unshakable after the truth. The empire expanded quietly, then visibly, then undeniably. The numbers rose, but so did the testimonies. A parent thanking him for hiring their kid, a client saying the work saved their quarter, a student sending a photo of their first invoice paid. Subject line, "It happened." He printed that one and taped it above a light switch. A reminder, this was never about money alone. This was about meaning that scales. He never forgot where it started. One cracked laptop, a small lamp, silence that felt like suffocation until it became oxygen. He returned to that room sometimes, sat in the chair, closed his eyes, and listened. The old whispers were gone. In their place was a thrum, a living machine, a team, a mission, a movement. He smiled, stood, and went back to work. Silence was never weakness. It was power in disguise. The disguise is off now, but the power stays. Clients kept knocking. Investors kept circling. Opportunities kept arriving like waves. He didn't surf everyone. He chose the tide that matched the map. He wouldn't be dragged by momentum. He would be moved by intention. That's how empires last. Not because they grow fast, but because they grow right. And when someone asked him on a panel, what changed the most from the kid in the back row to the founder on the front page, he answered without hesitation, nothing and everything. I'm still quiet. I'm still building at night. The difference is now, others get to build with me. He looked straight into the camera and added, calmly, play small in public, build big in private, until the day your results are so bright, keeping them private would be selfish. Then he went back to the office, where a whiteboard listed 3 columns. Now, next, never. The team gathered, pens in hand, eyes clear. He nodded once, the same nod he gave himself in the mirror all those years ago, and said, "Let's get to work." Because empires aren't monuments. Empires are engines. And his was just getting warmed up. Part 13, Facing the Past. Life has a strange sense of humor. The same people who once laughed at you can end up sending you their resumes. The same voices that once whispered "loser" can one day say "sir." It wasn't planned. He didn't plot revenge or scheme to humiliate them. He was too busy building. But as his empire grew, as departments expanded, as new roles opened, applications flooded in. And among them, familiar names surfaced. The bullies, the mockers, the ones who once filled his lunch breaks with humiliation. He stared at the resumes, smirking at the irony. Not with bitterness, not with anger, just recognition. The universe had flipped the script in a way no screenplay could have captured. The tables don't turn because you push them. They turn because you keep walking while others stay seated. The first interview was surreal. A face from the past walked into his glass-walled office, trying to hide their nerves. Years ago, that same face had sneered at him in the hallways, snatched his notebook, mocked his silence. Now, they carried a folder, their voice trembling as they said, "Thank you for the opportunity." He didn't gloat. He didn't remind them of their cruelty. He simply nodded, gestured for them to sit, and listened. They spoke about their skills, their struggles, their hunger for a fresh start. Inside, he felt a tug of irony, but also clarity. He wasn't here to punish them. He was here to lead. And leaders don't chase apologies. They create opportunities. He hired them, not all at once, not carelessly, but deliberately. The ones who showed genuine change, who carried humility in their eyes, who understood the weight of their mistakes. They became part of the machine he had built. And when they walked through the office doors for the first time, they didn't see the silent kid anymore. They saw the man who had turned silence into power. At their orientation, he stood before them, not with arrogance, but with composure. He told his story, not naming names, but letting the truth hang heavy in the room, about the nights of invisibility, about the grind no one clapped for, about the first sale that proved the fire was real, and about the showcase that shattered the narrative. They knew. He knew they knew, and that was enough. I don't need an apology. My success is enough. Working under him wasn't easy. It wasn't meant to be. He demanded excellence, accountability, clarity, but he also gave mentorship, structure, and second chances. They learned quickly that this wasn't about hierarchy. It was about contribution. Titles meant nothing if you didn't produce. Effort meant nothing if you didn't deliver. Some rose to the challenge. They worked harder, grateful for the second chance. Some struggled, crushed by the weight of their own guilt. But he never rubbed it in. He never weaponized the past. He simply held them to the same standard as everyone else. Results, discipline, respect. And in doing so, he taught them something far greater than revenge. He taught them redemption. One afternoon, during a break, one of them approached him. Their voice cracked as they said, "I don't know if you remember, but I wasn't always kind to you." He met their eyes calmly, smiled faintly, and replied, "I remember, but I also remember that people can change. What matters is what you do now." The words landed heavier than any lecture. The employee nodded, tears threatening, and walked back to their desk with a new fire in their chest. True victory isn't when your enemies bow. It's when they rise with you. The past had returned, but not to haunt him, to honor him. Every time he walked into that office and saw those familiar faces now working under his leadership, he felt the quiet power of persistence. He hadn't shouted them down. He hadn't chased validation. He had simply kept going. And now, his success was the only answer needed. But make no mistake, he wasn't naive. He knew not everyone who laughed at him deserved a place in his empire. Some applied out of desperation, others out of greed. Those resumes he passed on without hesitation. Because forgiveness doesn't mean foolishness. He drew a line, opportunity for the willing, distance for the toxic. This balance kept him clear-headed. His empire wasn't therapy, it was legacy. And legacy has no space for deadweight. In time, word spread further. The silent kid had not only built an empire, but had given jobs to people who once doubted him. Students whispered it in cafeterias. Parents told the story to their kids as a warning. Be careful who you laugh at. One day you might need them. The narrative had shifted completely. He was no longer the ghost of the classroom. He was a case study, a legend in motion. Life doesn't ask permission to flip the script. It just waits to see if you'll write your part. At a reunion years later, he walked into the same school building, now taller, sharper, commanding respect without saying a word. Old classmates approached him nervously, some with genuine admiration, others with awkward apologies. He shook hands, nodded, exchanged polite words, but inside he smiled, because he didn't need apologies. He didn't need explanations. He didn't need closure. His success was closure. And the sweetest part wasn't revenge, it was perspective. He had learned that the world has a funny way of bending to persistence. That if you refuse to quit, eventually even those who mock you will have no choice but to recognize you. And recognition, when it finally arrives, feels less like triumph and more like truth. The silent kid had faced the past, and instead of breaking it over his knee, he had turned it into fuel. The script had flipped, the story had evolved, and his empire was stronger because of it. Part 14, The Lesson for Us. This story was never just about one boy. It was never just about the silent kid in the back of the classroom, scribbling dreams into a notebook while the world mocked his stillness. No, this story is about all of us. About the times we've been invisible. About the moments we've been doubted, rejected, ignored. About the nights we've sat alone, staring at ceilings, whispering questions no one answered. Because here's the truth. We all have our silent kid moments. Moments when the crowd looks past us. Moments when the voices around us sound louder than our own. Moments when we wonder if our existence even ripples in the water. And in those moments, the temptation is to give up, to believe them, to shrink into the smallness they've assigned us. But the lesson? The only belief you ever needed was your own. Don't wait for the world to notice. Build until they can't ignore you. Think about it. Every rejection you faced, that wasn't the end. It was redirection. Every doubt they threw at you, that wasn't truth. That was projection. Every silence that greeted your efforts, that wasn't absence of worth. That was proof you were still in the shadows preparing. The boy's story teaches us something universal. Applause is not the starting point. Belief is. You don't need the claps of the crowd to validate your vision. You don't need the permission of skeptics to begin your journey. You don't even need the handshakes of allies when you have the grip of your own conviction. What you need is to keep building. The empire he built wasn't really about money or fame. It was about transformation. The transformation of doubt into determination, of invisibility into inevitability, of silence into strategy. And isn't that what life keeps asking of us? To turn the heavy stones of rejection into bricks for our foundation. To take the fire of pain and let it forge us instead of burn us. To look at the storm not as punishment, but as training. Your pain is either prison or preparation. You decide which. So ask yourself, where in your life are you still waiting? Waiting for someone to notice your talent. Waiting for someone to approve your dream. Waiting for a door to open without knocking. Waiting is death in disguise. The silent boy stopped waiting. He started building, and that was the shift. He didn't beg for a stage. He built his own. He didn't wait for an invitation. He sent himself. He didn't ask for permission. He gave himself authority. And eventually, the world that once ignored him couldn't look away anymore. The lesson for us isn't about copying his exact steps. It's about copying his mindset. Because we all have different battles, different empires to build. Some of us are building careers. Some are building art. Some are building families. Some are building healing inside, wounds no one else can see. But the principle is the same. The world won't always clap for you at the start. In fact, most of the time it won't. And that's okay, because applause is not oxygen. Belief is. The seed doesn't need an audience to grow. It needs soil, water, and time. If you're in that season right now, if you feel unseen, unheard, unvalued, understand this. Invisibility is not failure. It's preparation. Those nights alone are not wasted. They're sharpening you. That silence around your name isn't emptiness. It's strategy waiting to be executed. The silent boy was never truly silent. He was speaking the language of persistence, the only language success ever listens to. And so are you if you refuse to quit. Years from now, when your breakthrough comes, when your shockwave spreads, people will rewrite your history. They'll say they always knew. They'll claim they saw it in you from start. But you'll know the truth. They didn't. You did. And that will be enough. Because the greatest power isn't in proving them wrong. It's in proving yourself right. So what's the lesson for us? That silence is not weakness. It's power disguised. That rejection is not destruction. It's construction. That the nights of invisibility are not wasted. They're the training ground of your empire. And most of all, that the world doesn't get to decide when you've arrived. You do. You don't need the crowd's belief to start. You need your own belief to finish. This story is not just about a boy. It's about you. It's about me. It's about every person who has ever been overlooked, doubted, or underestimated. It's a reminder that greatness doesn't come from the spotlight. It comes from the shadows. It comes from a grind nobody claps for. It comes from the quiet nights where belief is the only voice you hear. So stop waiting. Stop asking. Stop doubting. Build. Build until the world has no choice but to see you. Because the truth is simple, but it's everything. The silent kid in class? That's all of us. And the empire waiting to be built? That's ours too. Part 15, The Legacy. Today, the silent kid isn't silent anymore. His empire speaks louder than any words could. It speaks in the offices filled with people who now build beside him. It speaks in the paychecks that feed families because he refused to quit. It speaks in the ripple effect, in the kids who once felt invisible and now sit taller, daring to believe they might be builders too. But through all of it, he never forgot what silence gave him. Focus, discipline, fire. Silence, the very thing they mocked, became his crown. Silence, the thing they thought meant weakness, became his sharpest sword. Silence, the cloak he wore when no one else saw him, became the forge that built him. Silence isn't empty. Silence is preparation. And when it ends with a roar. His story isn't just inspiration, it's proof. Proof that your darkest nights can build your brightest mornings. Proof that invisibility isn't death, it's development. Proof that every laugh, every insult, every doubt aimed at you can become fuel if you choose to burn it right. He lived through nights where even his own reflection looked like an enemy. He lived through days where the hallways echoed with cruelty. He lived through meals eaten alone, notebooks filled in shadows, victories no one saw. And yet, here he stands. Because the thing about silence is that it doesn't last forever. When it breaks, it doesn't whisper. It roars. The empire he built isn't measured in money alone. It's measured in meaning. It's measured in the employees who walk through his doors with dignity, in the kids who walk out of his mentorship sessions with notebooks blazing full of ideas, in the parents who whisper, "Thank you for showing my child that quiet doesn't mean powerless." The empire isn't glass towers and billboards. It's lives changed, dreams unlocked, and the proof that a boy nobody believed and became a man the world couldn't ignore. Success is not about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right, so loudly they have no choice but to hear. And now, the lesson is no longer his alone. It belongs to us. Every time they laugh at you, remember his story. Every time they doubt you, remember his silence. Every time they whisper behind your back, smile, because you know something they don't. You're building, and building takes time. There will be nights where you feel alone, days where you feel invisible, moments where you wonder if you're crazy to keep going. But invisibility is not a curse. It's your workshop. It's your lab. It's your forge. When they can't see you, they can't stop you. So the next time they laugh, the next time they doubt, the next time they whisper, don't argue. Don't explain. Don't waste your fire proving yourself in the moment. Just build. Quietly. Consistently. Relentlessly. Because one day, your silence will roar. And when it does, they'll realize the same thing the world realized about him. They weren't laughing at a ghost. They were laughing at a giant in disguise. This is the legacy of the silent kid. Not revenge, not arrogance, but proof. Proof that no matter where you start, no matter how invisible you feel, your belief in yourself can rewrite every script. Proof that the ones who sit alone today can stand at the center tomorrow. Proof that silence is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of strength. And that proof, that's waiting for anyone brave enough to build it. Legends aren't born in noise. They're carved in silence. So let this be your reminder. Don't rush for the crowd. Don't beg for applause. Don't waste your nights waiting for someone else to open the door. Write your own key. Build your own stage. And when the day comes, step onto it, not to prove, but to shine. Because just like him, you don't need them to believe. You need to believe. And when you do, the empire will come. And with that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.